As vaccine mandates go into effect around the nation, healthcare workers who refuse to comply are finding themselves out of a job. Here in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul is preparing to deploy the National Guard to prevent staffing shortfalls in the state's hospitals. So if they're willing to jeopardize hospital capacity in an effort to prevent a shortage of hospital capacity, what are they not willing to do? Friends, time for Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. Is Fauciism a religion? Yes, it is. This approach to dealing with the COVID-19 virus that has been with us really from the very beginning of anything to do anything in order to stop this virus is mandatory, really. You don't even get a say in it, no matter how minor the effect would be, no matter how disastrous the impact would be. There are people who think we have to be fighting always for COVID zero. And if you disagree with them, it's really an article of faith for them now. You're a bad person, you're immoral, you reject science, stuff like that. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, for example, the person who has taken over for disgraced Governor Andrew Cuomo, has given a sermon recently, an actual sermon at a non-denominational church, in which she said that God has answered our prayers with this vaccine, so we should all be so thankful.
We are not through this pandemic. I wished we were, but I prayed a lot to God during this time. And you know what? God did answer our prayers. He made the smartest men and women, the scientists, the doctors, the researchers. He made them come up with a vaccine that is from God to us. And we must say, thank you, God. Thank you. And I wear my vaccinated necklace all the time to say, I'm vaccinated. All of you. Yes, I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but you know there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know this. You know who they are. I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it and say, we owe this to each other. We love each other.
It's God who gave us the vaccine, not Pfizer and Moderna, who have a profit motive, of course, of tens of billions of dollars involved, and also Johnson & Johnson and others, AstraZeneca. And God also wants you to get the shot. I wonder, does God want us to get the shot even if we've had COVID and therefore have natural immunity? Oh, she didn't deal with that, did she? But no, she's a priestess, if you will, of the religion of Fauciism. And this is what happens when you live in a society where there are a whole lot of people who have rejected God and replaced God with the state, which is what we are seeing now in such clear ways through the course of COVID. It's really been obvious from the beginning, but now they're not even trying to hide it. Meanwhile, there are real consequences from this kind of absolutism. Hospital workers are being fired already in New York. New York State's mandate ordering healthcare workers, this is from CBS News, to get the COVID-19 vaccine went into effect Monday night at midnight. Some hospital networks, including Northwell Health, have already fired more than 24 healthcare workers. Others will have 30 days to get a COVID vaccine or lose their jobs. Officials say 16% of the state's hospital workers, or some 83,000 people, are not fully vaccinated. About 8% haven't gotten a single dose, putting them at risk of termination. So this is what we are facing now. It is so important to have the vaccines for hospital capacity to stay at a baseline level that they're willing to destroy hospital capacity with vaccine mandates. It's a pretty strange way of approaching things, isn't it? Now, what is the governor of New York, for example, going to do? You're going to have not enough people, and we are still, as she says, in the midst of a pandemic, much less than what it was at different times, but it's still a large number of cases and a large number of deaths day in and day out from this virus. So what happens when you make it much more difficult to give the kind of care needed in these hospitals? Not just for COVID, by the way, also for all kinds of surgeries and treatments. Well, the plan is for hospital workers to be replaced by National Guard troops. This is from the Daily News. Governor Hochul took executive action Monday to allow medically trained National Guard troops to fill in for hospital workers who are refusing to get their COVID-19 shots, despite the state's vaccine mandate in healthcare settings. So that's where we are. We've got hospital workers who are going to be replaced by National Guard medical personnel because that's how certain they are that we have to have some form of mandate here. Have to have the shot mandate or else. Meanwhile, healthcare workers who have been fired, turns out, will not be able to collect unemployment. Healthcare workers refusing the COVID-19 vaccine and are fired for failing to comply with the state law will not be able to collect unemployment benefits unless they present a doctor-approved request for medical accommodation, according to the New York Department of Labor. So it's not only that you will be fired from your job, but there's also the additional spite of, after, for these healthcare workers, treating the sick who had COVID at different points, for the last 18 months. After all of that, we are now at a phase where the belief is that we should fire people who were involved in that treatment and also deny them unemployment benefits. Just to be nasty about it, just to really ram home the viciousness of the state in this case. Now, I understand what the left, what the Democrats will say about this. Oh, it's not that big a deal. They just need to get the shot and be quiet. Really, it's not that big a deal. When do we get to stop being forced to get the shot? I just want to know, at what point will the Fauciites, Biden, and the rest of them finally say, you know what, we've done everything that should be reasonable and even have done a lot that was unreasonable. Enough is enough. We go back to a normal life of no mandates, no restrictions, let people live their lives. Well, there was a time, and you probably remember it because it was about 6 months ago, where they talked about herd immunity as somewhere in the 60 to 70% range of the US population vaccinated. Now, fast forward to today, and here's what Joe Biden is saying, because he's got all those health experts around him who listen to the science. Here's what he says would be required for us to return to normal.
How many Americans need to be vaccinated for us to go back to normal? Like, what is the percentage of total vaccinations that have to be deployed?
Well, I think we get the vast majority, like is going on in some industries and some schools, 97, 98%. I think we're awful close. But I'm not the scientist. I think, but one thing for certain, a quarter of the country can't go unvaccinated and us not continue to have a problem.
97, 98% vaccination rate, he's saying. Yeah, that's what the President of the United States, remember, he's got all the scientific advisors. He says he's not the scientist, but yeah, they're making policy. The executive branch of the federal government, through the Department of Labor, for example, is reaching in and forcing people to get the needle in their arms or face termination, or they can get tested, whatever it is, every week, every day. It's nonsense. It's absurd. And that's not the only stupid regulation, by the way, the whole vaccine fixation that they have, the mandates that they have in place. You also have masking, which continues despite the fact that there are dozens of studies that will show you that masking has almost no or no effect in stopping this virus from spreading. Yet CDC Director Rochelle Walensky wants you to know you're going to be masking up for a long time, no end in sight.
Are masks with us for a long, long time, years? Forever?
Well, I think the really important thing to emphasize here is the best way you can protect people with underlying conditions, immunosuppression, and people who are unable to get vaccinated is to get vaccines yourself, to surround them by people who are vaccinated, which puts them at much lower risk of disease. What we do know right now from the Delta variant is for people who have had 2 doses of the vaccine, they still need to wear their masks in the rare case that they might be a breakthrough infection. We absolutely are having studies that are starting now so that we can assess if after your booster shot, if you were to get a breakthrough infection, whether you can still transmit. Our hope is no, and we'll absolutely be doing those studies. Once we have those studies, I do hope that with disease transmission coming down, community transmission coming down, we will one day be able to get rid of those masks.
All right, coming up in a moment, New York's implementation of vaccine mandates with New York City Councilman Joe Borelli. Let's talk about the most important asset you own, your home. I mean, how much equity do you have in your home? 50,000, 100,000, more? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners the more equity you have, the greater the chance foreign and domestic criminals will come after you. Home title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes. In fact, Home Title Lock, America's leader in home title protection, is alerting homeowners they could already be a victim and not know it. Here's how it goes down. First, cyber thieves search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. Then they pull your home's online title, they forge your signature stating you sold your home, and they take out loans using your equity. You're not covered by insurance, your bank, or common identity theft programs. Protect your most valuable asset. Register your address now to see if you're already a victim and receive a complete title history of your home, a $100 value free. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. Again, that's HomeTitleLock.com. New York City Councilman Joe Borelli joins us when we come back. In the beginning months of the pandemic, New York City would erupt in loud cheers every night at 7 p.m. to show appreciation to healthcare workers. Flash forward to today, and hospitals have started firing those once praised as heroes because they have refused to get the COVID vaccine. The new Democratic Governor, Kathy Hochul, ordered the firing of unvaccinated doctors, nurses, and hospital staff and announced her plan to tackle any staffing shortages this way.
I will be signing an executive order to give me the emergency powers necessary to address these shortages where they occur. That's going to allow me to deploy the National Guard, who are medically trained, deploy people who've been retired, who may have had a license lapse, bring in people from elsewhere.
Here with reaction, New York City Council member Joe Borelli. Joe, great to have you.
Thank you, Buck. Thank you.
So, what's going to happen here? I mean, the deadline for health personnel, right, that has passed. Are they being fired? Are some getting a little extra time? Like, what's going to happen here? What's going on?
Well, the terminations have begun. Like you pointed out, just a year ago today, really, New York was banging pots and pans and calling our healthcare workers, rightfully so, heroes. These are people, remember, back then we didn't know a lot about the pandemic, and these people really were taking some risks and dealing with patients that were COVID positive. But the firings have begun, and our governor seems to be drunk with power. Our mayor seems to be drunk with power. And they're doing this despite the fact that there is no immediate risk of COVID from any of these people. And I'll say that very specifically. On the school side of things here in New York City, we started firing our school safety officers. These are all people that just last week had to test negative in order to come into school. They opted into a testing program. So these are actually literally the people that we know do not have COVID because they just took a darn test, and they're being terminated, they're being fired. Same thing with the hospitals. They could have easily made an opt-in testing program that was already in place in many hospitals, probably a good reason for it, right, at a hospital. And unfortunately, these folks are just drunk with power. They just can't control themselves. And the solution seems to be that we're going to just hire, out-of-state licensed professionals. We're going to get people who are retired, and we're going to get the National Guard. News for the governor, there just aren't enough people that fit those categories that want to work in New York City or New York State immediately to fill these gaps. I mean, there's no pool of people that are just sitting at home right now saying, I want to take the next Greyhound to Manhattan and fill in a spot at a hospital. It just doesn't exist.
How many people, Joe, in New York City, and then I know you're a New York City guy, but if you know the state numbers too, how many healthcare workers in total are we really looking at who are in jeopardy of firing as a result of the mandate?
We're talking in the thousands. I mean, this is not something that's a negligible number. This is already causing healthcare shortfalls in areas where they've already implemented this. Some private hospitals have already started implementing these policies and already been pushing people out the door. So we've already seen hospitals in this state that, because of the shortage, have begun to deny specific services, mostly pre-scheduled things. The ERs are still operating, but they're denying healthcare to some people based on their staffing shortage. So this is something that should have immediately raised a red flag. I get the gunboat diplomacy. We send our battleships around the world flexing our muscle and that sort of thing. And if the governor did that, but then pumped the brakes when it actually became a public health problem, that would have been, maybe not optimal, but it would have been a heck of a lot better than following through with this disastrous plan. Because when people are denied health care because of a staffing shortage, there's no other one to blame other than the governor.
There were protests against the vaccine mandate in New York City last night. People were chanting, "No vaccine, you won't force my body, my choice." So this is actually happening. We have some of the protest footage there for everybody. Not, there are people showing up, but it seems like not in enough numbers or not with the political muscle to get anything changed here. Joe, is there any real effort that could end up in stopping some of these vaccine, whether it's passports or mandates for people who are workers? It feels like everything that de Blasio and Hochul want to do when it comes to all this COVID stuff, they get away with.
Yeah, what stops this is elections. So people should get off their rear ends and actually turn out to vote, be it this November, in the primaries next June, in the next year's general election for governor. I mean, people need to push back on their own government and start taking things into their own hands. And by that, I mean voting. You know, we have tried every option. There have been dozens of lawsuits. There have been dozens of appeals. There have been dozens of challenges by labor unions who actually want to stand up for some of their workers who they don't want to fire. And all of it has been met with rejection from the courts. You know, a few judges here and there gave some temporary relief. But at the end of the day, the appeals are going nowhere. And it looks like these are going to stick around.
Joe, people are starting to be real concerned about Hochul, the new governor of New York. Here's something she said about the vaccine that raised a lot of eyebrows.
I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but you know there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. I need you to be my apostles.
What the heck is this lady talking about? Do you know much about Hochul? Should we be concerned?
I mean, you know, I like to think people talk to God in the metaphysical sense, not actually that they're getting direction from God or some invisible person when they're trying to make healthcare policy from the state. And I don't think she's a good ambassador or owns the solitary rights to the interpretations of God, nor do I think there's anything in the Bible that talks about vaccinations. So I wish she would do everything she could to encourage people to get vaccinated. And if she wants to make a weird joke, I suppose that's okay. But trying to channel God into convincing people who have genuine concerns over the vaccine. And that's really what this is. This is her doing something sort of tongue in cheek. And as opposed to not actually addressing some concerns people have had. By the way, the most interesting thing I've seen on social media in the last 24 hours has been a couple of NBA players who are actually pushing back against their team vaccine mandates. And these are some of the most articulate athletes I've ever seen really discussing why they have just general objections to the vaccine. These are people peak physical health, right? And they seem to not want to take any risk when it comes to their own body.
Joe, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The FBI crime statistics are out, and as expected, the data shows an unprecedented spike in murders nationwide in 2020. Coming up, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent James Gagliano joins us to take a look at the details. But I want to tell you about my friends at My Digital Money. Crypto markets heating up. People want to get in on the action, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, so many tokens, new tokens you maybe never heard of before, but you'll learn, right, if you get involved. That's where My Digital Money comes in. It's an easy-to-use, self-trading crypto IRA platform with incredible customer service. They'll actually answer your phone call when you call, and they'll help you get set up so you know what you're doing in the crypto world. Plus, they've got incredible security for your coins, trigger orders for you, and also a Play Money account. So you're really going to love this platform once you start using it. When it comes to your money, you deserve a team of dedicated professionals who have your back and speak to you honestly. That's My Digital Money. Go to mydigitalmoney.com. Again, that's mydigitalmoney.com. We'll be right back with more. Hold the line. According to newly released crime data from the FBI, the number of murders in the U.S. spiked nearly 30% in 2020 compared with the previous year. It's the largest single-year increase since the FBI began keeping national records in the 1960s. The FBI data shows 21,570 homicides in the U.S. in 2020, which is a staggering 4,901 more than in 2019. Overall, the violent crime rate inched up around 5%. Murder was up more percentage-wise in cities with a population between 10,000 and 25,000 than in cities of 250,000 to 1 million. So what caused these changes? If you've been watching the show, you probably have a good idea, but let's break it down with James Gagliano, retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent. James, good to see you.
Good to see you, Buck. Happy to join you.
So just tell us this. I mean, let's start with that top line number. The biggest increase in murders in 2020, and it really started about 6 months into 2020, around June, is when the real spike got going. What are the root causes of this? And what's your big takeaway from what we've seen?
Sure, and Buck, as a quasi-academic right now, and I'm studying police use of force, specifically the NYPD across the last 2 decades. We're taught to look at this from the perspective that correlation does not necessarily mean or equate to causality. Now, I'll tell you this. I became a young FBI agent in 1990 and was assigned to the New York City office of the FBI. New York City had just suffered the largest number of homicides in its history, 2,262. By the time I retired in 2016, broken windows policing, stop, question, and frisk, CompStat, all those things that now are tarred as racist, kept communities in the city safer, and we dropped that number to under 300. Now, the FBI just reported on their uniform crime reporting, which has been around since 1930. They just reported that murders are up 30%. And I would argue this. There is a causality here, and the causality is we are standing police down, we're demonizing them, right? We're moving forward with foolhardy things like bail reform, which means you can be arrested numbers of times on violent crimes and still be released and not be remanded into jail. All those things, Buck, are contributing to this crime surge.
So is it then also fair to point out that the big surge really got going, as I said, in June? I mean, the graphics would show this. I mean, if you look at it on a chart, it's June of 2020, all of a sudden the murder rate starts going up substantially. That coincides with BLM 2.0, the Black Lives Matter movement's second iteration after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. That would seem to be quite a coincidence, James, if there wasn't at least some narrative crossover here to what you said about law enforcement being held back and undermined.
Yeah, the irony here, Buck, is that a lot of the cities that have been championing this ridiculous hashtag, defund the police, are now in a position where they're struggling to hire police officers. What police officer, what candidate to be a police officer wants to come on the job now where they know that this insanity, this ludicrous nature of you cannot be proactive in policing. You have to sit back and you have to remain in a reactive posture. Look, we're seeing it in Minneapolis. We're seeing it in Atlanta. We're seeing it in Wisconsin. We're seeing it in New York City. We're seeing it in DC. And unfortunately, the media narrative that's out there, I mean, it was laughable yesterday. The FBI publishes its 2020 statistics in its uniform crime reporting. And what does NPR say? NPR says, yes, murders are up 30%. However, much of the violence was driven by firearms. So these sentient beings, firearms, are causing the uptick. No, that's not causing the uptick in crime. That's not causing the uptick in violent crime. And it's certainly not causing the uptick in homicides. It's the fact that people feel emboldened. They feel emboldened to target and harass police. Murders of police officers are up. And unfortunately, if you go into New York City, where I worked for 25 years, and you see the permissive environment that's going on there, junkies on the street corners, people allowed to publicly urinate on jump over subway turnstiles. What happens is broken windows policing, the notion that if you allow or have a permissive environment, the bigger crimes will proliferate. They'll find out that if that can happen, now we can do bigger things. And the fact that broken windows has basically been abandoned, it's basically been tarred and feathered as racist. We no longer use it in the big cities. And unfortunately, this is going to get worse, Buck, before it gets better.
How does it get better, James? I mean, start to walk us through what could be done here, other than obviously put a stop to the demonization and defunding of police narrative. But I mean, you brought up, for example, stop, question, and frisk. That was something that the left went after. De Blasio in New York City became a pretty big, national flashpoint. And they kept saying that it didn't do anything and it was racist. What's the truth of a program like that, for example, when it comes to public safety?
So right now, Buck, it's all about emotions and feels. It's not about the statistics. I gave you the statistics for homicides in New York City, right, back in 1990, and then all the way to today. 95% of the perpetrators of those crimes are people of color. 95% of the victims, Buck, are people of color. And I think what happens is, just like the left likes to manipulate verbiage, they like to change the words, right? Illegal immigration is now irregular migration. Abortion becomes a woman's right to her own health. We change these terms, and it's the same thing. We don't call it stop, question, and frisk. When we want to slam it, we call it stop and frisk. No, stop, question, and frisk is when a reasonable police officer determines something that raises their suspicion, like 2 o'clock in the morning, a bunch of people standing out and somebody holding their sweatpants as if they have a bulge there that is an indicia of a weapon. You can go up and talk to them. It's been so demonized. In New York City, Mayor de Blasio decided to disband the highly successful anti-crime unit. That unit was responsible for taking guns off the streets. You want to know why the homicides are increasing? Because people feel emboldened. When I say people, not people with firearms permits and law-abiding citizens who play by the rules. I'm talking about the bad guys. They're emboldened. They go out on the street now with a weapon, knowing that the police can't go up and stop them, talk to them, and determine whether or not they're armed or not. That's what makes New York City and other big cities, as you pointed out at the top, far more dangerous today than it was last year or 10 years ago.
You think the political blowback is strong enough now that New York and other cities that saw this crime surge, I mean, we got people expecting the Democrat candidate Eric Adams to be the next mayor of New York City. Do they realize? I mean, let's be honest about this. Do prominent Democrats in major cities realize you got to do something about the crime problem, or else you're not going to have a tax base left to engage in your socialist schemes?
You just nailed it, Buck. Because the people that you harm when you raise taxes or when you allow a permissive environment that allows crime to proliferate, it's not the rich people that can flee to the suburbs. It's the poor people that count on that social safety net that are stuck there and cannot leave. I like what Eric Adams is doing. Obviously, we know he was a former NYPD cop. I believe he was a lieutenant, served time as a New York State senator, and I believe he's the Brooklyn borough president. What he said is, I'm not going to run against law enforcement. I'm going to run toward it. Now, 81% of African Americans, 81% that were recently polled said they want the same level of policing or more in their neighborhoods. 81%. Now, Buck, all they're asking for is good policing. And I'll be the first one to suggest that in law enforcement, we've got to do a better job of getting rid of the bad apples. No doubt about it. But if 81% of African Americans want the same level or more policing in their neighborhoods, how asinine is it to think that you're going to do away with cops and that's going to make the inner city or any neighborhood more safe?
James, thanks so much for the expertise, my friend. Good to see you.
You got it. Good to see you too, Buck.
Last month, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller spoke out against the military brass for their failures during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Today, he's facing jail time. First TV contributor Morgan Zeggers gives her thoughts on that when we return. Let's talk about a potential investment opportunity. You ever thought about investing in real estate? Well, if you have, take me up on this recommendation right now. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, where you can learn more about my friends at Done For You Real Estate. If you haven't checked them out yet, let me make this easy for you. These guys have found a way to make real estate investing straightforward, and their system flat out works. I know because I'm using it. It allows everyday, hard-working Americans like you and me to finally own investment real estate without all the risk and difficulty of doing it on your own. I can't tell you in strong enough terms during this quick commercial how important it is you check these guys out and all the amazing things they'll do. So try this. Go to doneforyoubuck.com. At the top of the page, the podcast interview I did with Done For You Real Estate. You can hear my personal experience with their company in my own words. I'll tell you about it in detail. The city, the house, the broker, all of it set up through Done For You Real Estate. Visit doneforyoubuck.com, listen to the podcast interview, and give my friends a chance to show you what they can do for you. We'll be right back. In late August, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller risked his entire career by speaking out against military leadership for their inept handling of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, which resulted in 13 U.S. servicemen dying and 15 more critically injured. Here's what he said.
And I'm not saying we've got to be in Afghanistan forever, but I am saying, did any of you throw your rank on the table and say, hey, it's a bad idea to evacuate Bagram Airfield, the strategic air base, before we evacuate everyone? Did anyone do that? And when you didn't think to do that, did anyone raise their hand and say, we completely messed this up? I'm willing to risk my current battalion commander seat, my retirement, my family's stability, to say some of the things that I want to say, I think it gives me some moral high ground to demand the same honesty, integrity, accountability from my senior leaders.
The video went viral, and shortly thereafter, Lieutenant Colonel Scheller submitted his resignation letter to his superiors. Apparently that didn't mean much because as of yesterday, he was arrested and sent to the brig. His father, Stuart Scheller Sr., told the New York Post, "All our son did is ask the questions that everybody was asking themselves, but they were too scared to speak out loud. He was asking for accountability. In fact, I think he even asked for an apology that we made mistakes, but they couldn't do that, which is mind-blowing." This is according to the elder Scheller. He added that his son is due to appear before a military hearing on Thursday. So the military is holding someone accountable for the debacle in Afghanistan from the Biden administration, just not the right person. Morgan Zegers, founder of the Young Americans Against Socialism group and also a contributor here at the First TV, joins me now to share her thoughts. Morgan, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Buck.
What do we make of this? We have a guy who is now serving some time in the brig for speaking out against leadership. He already lost his job, apparently not enough. So the people that make the big mistakes, they get book deals and speaking engagements. The people that say this is a mess, they get prison, it seems.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of nuance to this issue. I think it's important to understand that this adult, this lieutenant colonel, understood the sacrifice that he was going to be making with his career and potentially with other actions, like now he's in the brig, by speaking out. And so he's an adult. He made that decision, and as frustrating as it is to see it happen, he knew that this was going to happen, and he knew it was going to happen, especially if he spoke out and broke that silence. What's more frustrating, if you look at it from the bigger picture, is the fact that he's being held accountable in this way for just speaking out and demanding accountability. It's pretty much as frustrating as when the other military member, I don't know if you remember this, a few weeks ago he spoke out, or maybe it was last month, spoke out about the Marxism that was being taught in our military. He spoke out saying the military is being politicized, and then he was basically, I think he resigned, he wasn't let go, but he was called out for politicizing the military. In reality, he was a whistleblower trying to bring attention to the military being politicized. And so where are we really focusing our attention, and who are we trying to criticize and hold accountable in the bigger picture? I'm more frustrated that the people that led to the deaths of 7 children in Afghanistan with a mistake drone strike, claiming it was going to hit an ISIS member, are not being held accountable. And so that's the kind of accountability American taxpayers want right now.
And it feels, Morgan, like as we learn more, you pointed out about, for example, the horrific mistaken drone strike. I mean, it's not just that, and you rightly say that Lieutenant Colonel Scheller knew that there would be consequences for his actions, took them anyway. I mean, some would say that that's brave, but he also then does have to, at some level, deal with those choices that he's made, which I think he is. I think he's accepting that. But we're allowed to look at it and say, well, hold on a second. So no one even gets fired or demoted or anything for the debacle of the Biden withdrawal from Afghanistan. No one in the military chain of command, not the national security advisor over at the White House, and no one seems to get in any real way in trouble for, as you point out, the drone strike that killed 10 people, 7 of them children. And they went around on TV, top members of the Biden administration and the military, saying this was a righteous strike that saved a lot of lives. It just feels like that can't be the way this is, but that is what's playing out.
Yes, and you really touched on a good point there. The word that infuriated me the most was to find out that they were justifying it as a, quote, righteous strike when they claimed they were attacking an ISIS-K member, and it turned out to be children. And what really struck me was Rand Paul, when he was questioning one of the military leaders, he said, so can you tell me if it was an ISIS-K member or not? And the guy said, well, we don't know. It's being investigated still. We're doing a research report on it. And Rand Paul was like, you'd think you would have figured this answer out before actually sending the drone strike, but I guess that's just me. And when we look at all of this, when we look at our country, there's so many problems, right? I try and look at the bigger picture here and find hope in all of this mess. I'm a big believer that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it does bend towards justice. And right now, when we look at the vaccine mandates that are clearly unconstitutional and will be strucken down, whether that's soon or in a few years by the Supreme Court, or we can look at the behavior of the military members, we have to understand there's going to be accountability, or at least I hope there will be. But things have to happen first. And that's what's happening today on Capitol Hill. There's hearings, there are people testifying, there are people answering questions. And our federalist system is currently investigating where there were issues in the system of our military. So that's going to take time to figure out where lies happened, where miscommunications happened, and where mistakes were made. But what hurts and what really rubs salt in the wound is that they were so quick to jump and squish this one lieutenant colonel for speaking out. They were so quick to stomp their boot on his face, and they are so slow to hold each other accountable for the big mistakes that were made in the pullout.
Morgan, I'd like to shift gears for a second here and discuss something out of California as well that I know you're following closely. Governor Gavin Newsom, it hurts to say that out loud, but he is still the governor and going to be the governor for the foreseeable. He put out this tweet: California is now permanently a vote-by-mail state because we believe in making voting easier and for every voice to be heard. Vote by mail comes with, in the way that California is doing it, all kinds of, let's say, lack of safeguards. And it also clearly is something the Democrats believe will benefit them in an electoral sense. In California, maybe we figure it's a blue state, it's kind of lost to sanity forever. But I have a feeling, Morgan, that other states are going to try to follow suit, even some purple ones, even some states where Democrats can ram this through. And vote by mail comes with some problems.
Of course. Well, first things first, in inner circles, in political groups, in community gatherings, the talk on town is that election integrity is going to be the most important issue for our country. The most important thing we can do is protect the elections that keep this country free and sacred. What we're seeing, though, Buck, this is a tale as old as time. All right. So a crisis happens, and then these radical leftists propose a concept that normally average people in their right mind would never support because it's too radical, it's too out there. But when it's presented in a time of crisis, it's a bit normalized because people want that sense of security, they want that safety. And so what we saw is this concept of mail-in voting, this massive mail-in voting, sending a ballot to everybody that's on these really old and outdated voter rolls, not just to people that actually send in the request for an absentee ballot. That happened during COVID, where they said it would be safer and people will feel more safe if they are given an option to vote at home, and we can increase voter turnout during this pandemic, this time of crisis. Well, look at us now. We are nearing the end of this pandemic. We're basically out of it. Anything that says we're not out of this pandemic at this point is a scam, if you ask me. And what do you know? The concept of mass mail-in voting is now a normalized concept in America, and it's in about like 8 states, right? So look at what's happened.
Morgan, always great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Buck.
Orlando Magic player Jonathan Isaac was asked about vaccine hesitancy and why he hasn't gotten the jab. His answer? Pure common sense. We'll have that coming up in Quick Hits. Right now, I want to tell you again about my friends at My Digital Money. Crypto is hot, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, so many digital tokens out there. But have you ever bought and sold crypto before? How do you get started? That's where My Digital Money comes in. It's an easy-to-use, self-trading crypto IRA platform with incredible customer service. They'll actually answer your phone call and help you get started. Plus, they've got all kinds of great features, incredible security for your coins, trigger orders, a play money account. You got to see it for yourself. The crypto market's heating up. This could be a great time to get into crypto, especially if you've never done it before. But you need people you can trust and will speak to you honestly. That's My Digital Money. Go to mydigitalmoney.com. Again, that's mydigitalmoney.com. We'll be right back with Quick Hits. Jen Psaki could use a little help in basic economics, and an NBA star speaks his mind about the vaccine. It's Quick Hits time. Let's do it! Do you think that this administration has a lot of people in senior roles who really have a sound understanding of basic economics? I don't. That's maybe an assumption, right? We don't necessarily know what the knowledge base is of a lot of senior Biden administration officials, but when you just look at the kind of policies they support, the language they use specifically around economic issues, and the emotionalism that seems to drive so much of it, you'd be forgiven for thinking that maybe they didn't exactly ace Econ 101 back in the day. And then there are moments when you actually have some real proof of this, and Jen Psaki provides it in rather amusing fashion here by just saying it's just like so unfair when people increase costs for consumers when taxes go up on those businesses.
There are some, and I'm not sure if this is the case in this report, who argue that in the past, companies have passed on these costs to consumers. I'm not sure if that's the argument being made in this report. We feel that that's unfair and absurd, and the American people would not stand for that.
unfair and absurd. Yes, costs are costs, and someone has to bear them, and businesses tend to not like doing that. Then you have Orlando Magic star Jonathan Isaac. Now, you've probably heard a lot of very nasty stuff in the media about your typical vax-hesitant individual, right? Red state, rural, Trump voter. That's the caricature that's out there. But there's a whole lot of folks from all kinds of different backgrounds who have questions about the vaccine. And one of the most medically clear-headed and obvious objections to getting the vaccine is, of course, prior infection and recovery. Natural immunity. People will talk about this. They'll bring it up. The Biden administration, the Fauciites, ignore this, pretend like it doesn't really exist for some reason. They rarely talk about it. Just recently, they've been forced to. Well, Orlando Magic star Jonathan Isaac does not want to get the shot. He has had COVID. He has antibodies. And so when he's asked about why he doesn't want to get vaccinated, his response, which you should see here, is rational, eloquent, and rather compelling.
I've had COVID in the past, and so our understanding of antibodies, of natural immunity has changed a great deal from the onset of the pandemic, and it's still evolving. I understand that the vaccine would help if you catch COVID, and you'll be able to have less symptoms from contracting it. But with me having COVID in the past and having antibodies with my current age group and physical fitness level, it's not necessarily a fear of mine. I'm hesitant at this time, but at the end of the day, I don't feel that it is anyone's reason to come out and say, well, this is why or this is not why. It should just be their decision.
Everything he says there seems entirely reasonable and rational, doesn't it? And I guess that's the problem for the left. I'm just wondering when they're probably going to pull that off the internet. Disinformation! Not allowed to say it. Probably working for Russia. You know, all the usual crazy stuff the left says whenever someone points out how wrong they are on something. Speaking of wrong, Nancy Pelosi, she referred to the Biden Build Back Better agenda in a way that, well, said a lot more than she intended.
Keep government open. We have to do those imminently, more imminently even, to address the full Obama agenda of building back better and I love to say building back better.
Doesn't even correct herself, because does it really matter? I mean, might as well be the Obama agenda, right? But, oh, Joe Biden, he's a moderate. You can trust good old Joe, right? All this nonsense they said. And speaking of nonsense, here's a mom at a school board meeting. There are some parents who are truly terrified their children are going to die from COVID, and it's because they either cannot read or choose not to read any of the actual data about how children are at a 1 in a million risk of death from, literally 1 in a million risk of death from this. But some moms didn't get the memo, so to speak. Here's one.
We do not have a society, we do not have a country if we do not have public health. If we do not have public health safety protocols like, yes, masks. Children are not just suffering and dying at greater rates right now, they're spreading COVID throughout the population at higher numbers. Anti-masking doesn't just affect schools, but our society as a whole. It affects cancer patients and the immunocompromised and the elderly and just about everyone. People do not get to walk around shooting loaded firearms randomly into crowds, and people are not entitled to turn themselves into deadly biological weapons by spraying disease-laden aerosols wherever they choose, randomly killing innocent people. This is not freedom, this is homicide.
Homicide, she says. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly's up next. Shields high.